Much like the modern Wind Witch engine or the old Zodiac engine, the Traptrix monsters used to be one of the most popular level 4 engines to put into virtually any deck, and suddenly they just sort of fell off the map. Now what I think is interesting about this is that the one remaining Traptrix monster that still sees competitive play is Traptrix Rafflesia, but what I think is really interesting is that Traptrix Rafflesia is the boss monster of the Traptrix archetype. However, I think it's what ultimately led to the demise of the entire archetype besides itself. We don't usually see this happen. Usually when older decks get support that are as good as Traptrix Rafflesia, it just makes the older deck better, but in this case, Rafflesia basically made the entire Traptrix engine irrelevant, which I think is kind of cool and something we don't see too often. So in today's video, I'm going to go through sort of the history of the Traptrix monsters, and then when we get to Traptrix Rafflesia, we're going to talk about why that sort of ruined the entire deck. So first off, the Traptrix monsters did not see a lot of play when they were initially released, and that's partly due to their actual timing. They were released at the end of 2013, right on the cuff of the second half of the Dragon Ruler Tier 0 format, basically. This was not when Dragon Rulers were like full power with spellbooks and spellbooks of judgment still legal, but it was sort of the Ravine Ruler format, and there were 3 monsters and 1 trap release. So all the Traptrix monsters are kind of interesting. They're unaffected by the effects of whole normal trap cards, which is kind of cool. And then they all sort of have these effects that let you play your whole trap cards to a greater ability than your opponent. So like Traptrix Atrax lets you activate the whole normal trap cards from your hand, which means that it saves them from getting hit by stuff like MST. Then there's another Traptrix monster that like special summons or adds Traptrix monsters to your hand when you resolve the whole trap cards, and that's pretty cool. It's a way to keep up advantage, but the main one that people ended up playing was Traptrix Myrmilio. Now Traptrix Myrmilio adds a trap hole from your deck to your hand when you normal summon it, and then when you special summon it, you get to blow up a back row your opponent controls. So you get 2 effects for the price of 1 monster, and that came into play a little bit later, but first of all, let's talk about the trap card they got. They got Traptrix Trap Hole Nightmare. When a monster that was special summoned this turn activates effect on your opponent's side of the field, negate that effect, and if you do, destroy that card. And then also they had Bottomless Trap Hole, but I'm sure many of you already know about that card. But Traptrix Trap Hole Nightmare and all these cards really weren't played until much later because these cards simply could not compete with any of the Dragon Ruler cards, and it wasn't until we got Traptrix Dianea 9 months later that people really started to play this deck. So this card was released in Primal Origin, which you might remember is the same time that the artifacts were released, and this is also the main, or one of the main reasons we saw the Hat deck really become popular. Now Hat stands for Hands Artifact Traptrix, and this sort of is half, or the one half of the Traptrix side, because on one hand you had Traptrix Vermilio, which allowed you to gain advantage, but this card really glued that engine together. So once again, it's unaffected by the effects of whole normal trap cards, and then when this card is normal summon, you can target 1 Traptrix monster in your graveyard, special summon that target in defense position. So that's really good because it means you can do this sort of really staple play that you're always going to make in Hat, which is summon Myrmilio, add like a Bottomless to your hand, set the Bottomless, make sure you get rid of an opponent's monster with a Bottomless, and then when your opponent runs over the Myrmilio, on your next turn you summon Traptrix Dianea, special summon the Myrmilio, pop an opponent's back row, and then make a powerful rank 4, such as Silent Honor Arc or Evilswarm Exiton Knight, something along those lines. And that was a really big swing in card economy and tempo. But what's really cool about Traptrix Dianea is it actually has its own special summon effect. So when this card is special summoned, you can target 1 whole trap normal card in your graveyard, set that target, but banish it during the end phase of your next turn if it is still on the field. So basically, you get to set that original trap hole card that you searched with Vermilio just for 1 turn, which puts your opponent in a pretty awkward position because it means that they either have to willingly throw a monster into your back row that they know you have, or they simply have to not summon anything that you destroy with it, which was pretty tough considering how generic and all-encompassing cards like Bottomless Trap Hole and even Traptrix Trap Hole Nightmare really were back then. Pretty much every monster either had more than 1500 attack or it was special summon, and that meant that you could pretty effectively deal with most of your opponent's cards just using trap holes, which made Traptrix Dianea pretty darn good. Now a lot of people just played 2 Dianea, 1 Myrmilio. 2 Dianea and 3 Myrmilio. Myrmilio was always a staple 3 of. Dianea was sort of generally played at 2 copies, sometimes at 3, sometimes at 1, but usually 2 copies. And that was really when we saw Traptrix at their peak. They were very popular at the North American WCQ, taking both first and second place. I want to say they were the most represented deck in Top Cut. I'm not sure if for the entire top 64 that's true, but I know for like the top 16, almost every deck was playing the Traptrix monsters to some capacity, except for like a choice few. But these cards were incredibly popular, and then they weren't. So they just kind of fell out of popularity with the release of like Shadow's and Burning Abyss. And I really should probably just make a video about Duelist Alliance, because that pack really did change the game in a lot of different ways. Like all the cards in the Traptrix deck kind of became way more irrelevant. Speaking of like the trap hole cards themselves, not a lot of people were playing the trap holes or the Traptrix monsters. Not a lot of people were playing the hands anymore. I already made a video about that. And really, I mean, Artifacts saw some play in Shadow's, but once Moreltalk went to 1, they simply weren't played that much. But anyway, so Duelist Alliance means that Traptrix monsters don't really show up anymore. And then in the next set, New Challengers, at the end of 2014, the last set 2014, we get a card called Naturia Sacred Tree. Now this card is not technically a Traptrix card, although it definitely is really good indirect support. So the main portion of this card that we're focusing on here is that you can either tribute on Earth Insect Monster to special summon a Earth Plant Monster from your deck, or vice versa. Now, the good news is that all of the Traptrix cards fit those criteria. Myrmilio is an insect and Dionea is a plant, but then the other Traptrix, the other two that we talked at the beginning of the video, those ones are plant and insect as well, so you can kind of cycle through them. And this card was fun. I remember playing it in a couple rogue decks at locals, and it's pretty good. When you can get sort of the momentum going where you're destroying back row and searching cards every turn, it definitely wasn't like good enough to compete with Shadow's and Brain Abyss and Clifford's, but it at least made Traptrix semi-playable again. Eventually, though, I mean, when I say eventually, I mean really far ahead. 2 years later, almost, we got Breakers of Shadow, and this introduced Traptrix Rafflesia. Now, Rafflesia is an incredibly good card. I'm sure many of you already know what it does, but I'll just read through it. So it's a strictly defensive card. It only has 2,500, or it's 2,500 defense and only 300 attack. Takes any 2 level 4 monsters, and this card is unaffected by trap effects while it has Exceed material, which is really, really good. That means that your opponent can't hit this with a Solemn Strike, for example. Traptrix monsters you control, except Rafflesia, cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects, so you can even see sort of this card supporting the older deck that it's meant to go with. Your opponent cannot target Traptrix monsters you control, except Rafflesia, with card effects. So you can really see that there are 2 effects here that are supporting the older deck. But then we get to the final effect, and it says, once per turn, during either player's turn, you can attach 1 Exceed material from this card and send 1 whole normal trap card that meets its activation conditions from your deck to the graveyard. This effect becomes that trap card's effect when that card is activated. So basically this means if your opponent summons a monster that Bottomless Trap Hole can hit, you can attach a material and then send Bottomless Trap Hole to the graveyard to apply the Bottomless Trap Hole effect to your opponent's monster. We've seen this come up time and time again. Currently, as I just mentioned at the beginning of the video, Floodgate Trap Hole is really popular. It's a really good counter to Spirals. It's non-targeting and it flips the guy face down. So this card's really, really good for that reason. But what do I mean by this killed the Traptrix engine? Well, the problem with Rafflesia is that it's too good. Why would you summon a Myrmilio, which takes up your normal summon, and also has the potential to brick if you draw multiples? Why bother summoning a Myrmilio and waiting to set a trap card when you can simply just Exceed summon Traptrix Rafflesia with any 2 level 4 monsters? You don't even have to play any Traptrix monsters or cards in your main deck. You can just play 1 copy of Bottomless Trap Hole if you want, or maybe you want to play like 1 Treacherous Trap Hole. Maybe you just want to play 1 single Treacherous Trap Hole. Well, now you don't have to draw it, and you don't have to waste your normal summon to search it. All you have to do is, if you want to activate Treacherous Trap Hole, is just summon 2 level 4 monsters. And as it turns out, players are a lot more willing to play 1 extra deck monster and 1 or 2 trap holes in their deck than they are willing to give up their normal summon and play anywhere from 5 to 6 cards for a Traptrix engine in their deck. And this is why Traptrix Rafflesia killed the Traptrix engine. Now, I don't know if the Traptrix engine would have been very popular without this card, like when this card was released in Breakers of Shadow. Chances are probably not. It was likely just too slow, which is fine. But this card really, when it came out, and you can in place in like a Traptrix deck. It does have those sort of supporting effects for the archetype, but in general, there's just no reason to play the Traptrix engine anymore, which is really sad because Myrmilio and Dionia are really, really solid cards with awesome card design, but they're not too oppressive. They're just sort of good searching effects and stun effects and a rank 4 effect, and I think that maybe they could be good again, but with Rafflesia out, they simply aren't necessary. And we can really see this because just a couple months ago in Code of the Duelist, we got a new Traptrix card and basically no one talked about it. So it's Traptrix Mantis. When this card is normal summon, you can add one Traptrix monster from your deck to your hand, unaffected by the effects of whole normal trap cards. Once per turn, you can target one set spell or trap card you control, return that target to the hand, then you can set one spell and trap card from your hand. So this card basically is like a Myrmilio for monsters. It's just like a Stratos for the deck. And then it has this quick effect, which might seem kind of weird because you can't really activate the trap card that you set that turn, but it at least helps you dodge stuff like Twin Twisters on like crazy back row. And you don't have to bounce trap hole cards with the bouncing effect. You can just target any face down spell or trap card you control and then set any spell or trap card from your hand, which is kind of cool. But even with a card like this, which sort of fleshes out the engine, if you wanted to play like a dedicated Traptrix deck with like Myrmilio and Dionia and then like 3 Mantis, even with all of that, there's not really any reason to. You probably should just play Rafflesia instead. And this does suck because I loved playing the Traptrix engine. I played it in a ton of different decks back then, and it was just a lot of fun. I know a lot of people didn't like the hat archetype or the hat format really, but I thought it was cool. I like playing around back row. But I don't think we're ever going to see these cards playable again unless they get something really crazy like a on-theme Brilliant Fusion type card. We probably won't see this deck played anymore, simply because it's all normal summons and players would rather just play one Rafflesia in their extra deck, one Trap Hole in their main deck, than spend like 6 to 10 slots filling with Traptrix monsters that they don't want to draw because they're all normal summons. And maybe if the game slowed down, these cards would be played. Probably not. But this is pretty much the end of the analysis. I don't know what else there is to say. It's kind of disappointing that a boss monster release to help out an old archetype actually killed that archetype. I don't think we see that very often. I might be forgetting something. There's not really a situation that's exactly like this, but if there was a situation where the boss monster being released after the old monsters actually ended up killing the old monsters in their respective decks, please let me know because I would be happy to cover it. I just can't think of any off the top of my head. But anyway, I'll see you guys later. Bye.